Hello and welcome to the year of being 70. I'm Lucy Makara and I'm with my childhood friend Lisette Schoutemaker. We were both 70 at towards the end of 2024 and we are talking weekly on our podcast about our memories, our lives, our ideas and thoughts and who we are now at the age of 70. So hello, Lisette.
Hello, and isn't it a wonderful thing that you can be in England and I can be in Amsterdam and we can still talk and see each other? It was not always like that. Today we're gonna, we spoke about what are we gonna talk about, and we remember the phone, how what a rare and wonderful thing it was, and how expensive it was. What is your first memory, your childhood memory, Lucy, of the phone?
My childhood, my earliest memories of a phone is that we had a big tall house and our hall was kind of had a staircase that went round it and the main phone of the house was in the hall. So everybody, was sort of available if you were on the phone. I mean, not that I was when I started, because what I can remember is those black Bakelite phones, which I think were called the Model 500, and they were black and sort of slightly kind of pointy
Heavy,
and
heavy.
heavy, very heavy and angular. And the cord was sort of like plaited. It wasn't sort of curly cord. It was actually plaited fabric, I think, of some kind. And the dial was heavy, it was metal, and it had numbers to one, two, three, four, up to nine, and then zero. And on our phones, it also had, there were three letters for each number. So A, B, C, D, E, F, and our phone number, I remember so clearly, I'll never forget it, was Flaxman, because that was the phone number, that was the prefix for Chelsea, Flaxman 0934, which was abbreviated to FLA 0934. And when you picked up the phone, you said, hello, Flaxman 0934.
Well, I remember our first telephone number. It was 4572. So only four digits, four digits was enough. And our phone, I think, was white and it was in the living room with a chair there. And I remember my mother being on the phone. But it was mostly, her friends that called or yeah, friends to make kind of, you know, arrangements for us, or her mother that called, but it was a rare thing. And to pick up the phone was kind of a thing. I mean, you can't
Yeah.
hardly now we live with our phones, and it's even quite strange that they are still called a phone because we don't call each other so much anymore. We do
No.
everything else on that small machine. But the phone was really something.
Yes,
And
and the noise of the phone, instead of, it didn't kind of buzz or it just went bring, bring, bring. It
yeah,
was very loud and people would run to answer the phone. And it was, yes. And if you dialed out, I can still remember the physical feeling of dialing that it was
yes.
heavy and it went and you moved it round and then it went back into place and
Lovely
then the
sound. I
next
love
number.
that sound. I hear it right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And then I think, I don't know, I must have been, maybe it was about 1960. I might have been about six when we got rid of the black Bakelite phones. And there was actually one in my father's study as well. But we got coloured phones and they were a sort of softer, rounder shape. I think we may have had a beige one and possibly a green one. And my parents got one in their bedroom as well. But it's still the main phone still lived in the hall. And
Well, we
so
had only one phone. Really? You had three phones.
free, yes.
Wow. We had only one phone.
Extravagant.
And I mean, just imagine the lack of privacy. There was no privacy there. Like yours was in the hall. So when you spoke, everybody could pass by and the staircase, everybody could hear. With us, it was like smack there in the living room. It was like not private at all.
No, no, absolutely. No, it was very, and also it was considered kind of luxurious and expensive. So, if you spent, especially when I, kind of probably got to the age of about 10 or a teenager, and I would want to talk to my friends on the phone in the evening or whenever, people would kind of shout out, "How long have you been on the phone? Get off the phone. You've been on, it's too expensive. Stop, put the phone down now." So,
Yeah.
that was another kind of consideration. It was special. So you didn't use
Special,
it
you
all
kept
the
it
time.
brief. It was
Yeah.
just for announcements. And I remember my father, I think he went to Harvard for a course. And so he was in the US for a few weeks. I remember how we drove him to the airport, and it was quite a big thing for him to kind of leave us as a family for so many weeks. And then he would call once a week, and he would speak and we would speak. I would speak and he would speak, and then we would both stop, and then we would start to speak again. And there was like this delay and this kind of echo. And then my mother would go, "Oh, this is all too expensive." And, she wanted to talk to him, but we were all kind of huddled around the phone.
Yes, and that would have been very expensive. An international call.
An
That would
international
be,
call. You could
a
also
big
call
deal.
collect, remember?
Yeah.
You
Oh,
could call
yes. Yes.
collect. So the cost would be picked up by your parents if you
Yeah.
had no
Yeah.
money. And of course,
Yes.
there were phone boxes everywhere on,
Yes, I was going to say phone boxes. I mean, in London, we had, those beautiful red phone
yeah,
boxes, those
we were
iconic.
famous for those. Us weren't as glamorous as
We had one round the corner from us, and I can't remember why I would have gone to a phone box, but I do remember using it occasionally. And the
privacy,
button,
privacy
yes,
maybe.
possibly, yes, that might have been it. But yes, and we called it reversing the charges. It was call and collect, but you had the choice. You could press button A or press button B, and I can't remember what they were. But again, I can, the feeling of those metal buttons that you pushed in. You put in a two-penny piece, and you'd had to keep feeding it to, if
Yeah,
you, unless you were calling collect, you had to keep feeding it. And then
yeah,
and
you
then
had to
at the
keep
end of
feeding.
the call, I think you could press button B, and if you had any money left that you hadn't used up, it would sort of chunkle down into a holder, and you could take your remaining two pennies away with you.
And now we don't even use coins anymore.
No, no, and our lovely red phone boxes are sort of preserved as a kind of historical icons, and some of them have little libraries in them and
Yeah.
things like that, which is really cute. But
Yeah.
yes, no need for phone boxes anymore. Did you ever get a wall phone? Did you ever progress to getting a phone that hung on your wall? That was a big deal.
Well, not in our house, but that was when I was a student, we had one phone. At some point, I lived with 23 student girls, women only, and there was one phone. And at some point, I got the room next to the phone, and there was kind of this thing around it. So for some privacy, but of course, I also went in and out, and it wasn't very well insulated. So I heard so many conversations with mothers like, "No, I'm not coming this weekend. Yeah, I'll come next weekend." And yeah, and the laundry and but all these conversations with mothers mainly, and then with boyfriends, of course, too. And we had to keep tab of there was like a ticker, and you had to keep trace. And so at the end of the month, that was all added up. And of course, it never
Oh,
covered costs. So
yes,
it was
yes.
always,
Gosh, yes. Well, when I was at boarding school, there was like a phone box in one of the halls. And so I think most people would probably ring home maybe once a week.
yeah,
And you would, again, you'd reverse the charges and call
yeah.
your parents. And I remember, you queue outside. There's always a queue, especially on a Sunday evening outside this wooden phone box. And people would go in looking happy and then come out in tears because they would spoken to their parents and they were homesick. And, it was all very tragic. And then other people, older girls had boyfriends they'd talk to, as you say. And that was exciting. I don't think, and we certainly never had a wall phone when well, in my parents' house, we certainly didn't. That never. I think I had one in one of in our when maybe when I was in my 20s. I think we had wall phones then, possibly.
But still, it was fixed. There was
A
a
fix.
cord. I mean, you
Yeah.
had to be there. And with us, it was high up on the wall, so it kind of stood there, hanging over. And I just marvel at how we made appointments and kept them and never shifted them, because how would you let the other person know? You'd have to call them. And even when my first job at the bank, sometimes chasing a person to get them on the phone was kind of part of the job, to get a person on the
Yes.
phone. It was
Yes.
a thing.
Yes, absolutely. And then, when I was 21, we went to Australia, and that was such a long way away. And there was no, there was no Zoom, there was no mobile phones. So I think, and phone calls were expensive. So I think we called home once a month. And, it was expensive, and all my family or Rob's family, whoever we were ringing, were at the other end
Yeah.
and all sort of talking. And I can't remember, we almost had a list of things to tell them. And, we might have been talking to them for about half an hour, but it was we'd both be, I can remember sitting sort of in the hall with the phone between us talking to different people. And it just made everything feel so far away, the communication being so
Yeah.
difficult and
Which was also freeing and
yeah,
liberating.
yeah,
In
that
a way,
too.
you could really be away, which is very difficult nowadays. I
Yes.
also remember my father, because he was kind of this businessman. At some point, he got a car phone. And
Yeah.
I must have been about 25. So this must have been the end, almost the end of the 70s. And they played a trick on me. I lived in The Hague at the time. And then my father called me on the phone, and my mother rang the doorbell. So there were two things happening at the same time, and I didn't really know what to do. And they were kind of, it was like this
Oh, hilarious.
prank that it's I still remember it to this day.
That must
Because
have been very shocking, really, that could have happened.
yeah, I didn't really know what to do. And I'm not sure, because at some point we had these phones that still had an antenna, and you could actually walk through the room with them.
Yes, I don't think they came in till the 90s, possibly.
Really?
Cordless phones, they were suddenly
Yeah.
a really big deal.
Yeah.
And yes, and you could either, because they had to charge. So,
Yeah.
unlike cord phones that were plugged into the wall. Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the phone itself wasn't plugged into anything. But yes, they had little kind of plastic antenna. Oh, actually, you could pull the antenna out,
Yeah,
couldn't you, sometimes?
exactly.
And it was
Exactly. You had to
it
pull
was
the
a
antenna out, and you stood there with this kind of thing. But the idea that you could just,
walk
go
around,
anywhere,
not
walk
be
around
attached
with
to the
it, was
phone.
like very, very new.
Yes, yes, indeed. And sometimes if you had too long a call, the charge would run out and the phone
Yeah.
would just go dead and you'd have to
Yeah.
call
Well,
back
that still
and
happens
recharge it.
when we do too much in our phone. But also, I remember this conundrum of, that was the time that my friends started to live together, move in with each other, or get married, lots of married weddings. And then you'd want to call a girlfriend in the evening, but you might get her partner on the phone. And then you'd have to have this, because now you just call a person. And with some of my friends, I hardly know their partners, because I never speak to them, because I always speak to her, or the other way around, speak to him and not to her. But then whoever picked up the phone, and then you'd have to have this kind of polite conversation until it was, time to ask for the other person. Whereas everybody knew you
Yeah.
weren't calling for this person, you were calling for the other person. But and that was kind of, I remember the hesitancy, because with some of those husbands or partners, I never really knew what to speak about. And
No, and you couldn't just say, "Oh, can I speak to so and so straight
no,
away?"
no, no.
You have to, go through the motions.
Go through that little charade.
But you wanted to talk
Yeah.
to both of them, of course. But there was also, I mean, you never, as you say, you never knew when you made a phone call, you never knew who was going to answer the phone unless the person lived alone or whatever. And sometimes you didn't necessarily want other people to know you were ringing who you wanted to speak to. So sometimes you would make a phone call and the wrong person would answer and you just put the phone down because you didn't want to say, oh, I actually. And but also I remember ringing boyfriends and getting, their parents would answer the phone, and then I'd say they'd say, "Who is it?" And I'd say, "It's Lucy. Can I speak to whoever?" And sometimes people would say, "What's it about?"
Oh yeah.
None of your business.
Oh yeah.
I just want to talk to them.
Yeah.
And yes, exactly. You might, yeah, very, very sort of uncertain kind of means of communication in a way. Um, when do you remember, when did your family first get a television, Lisette?
We were late getting a television. My parents kind of used to go on holiday together, and then this woman would come and look after us, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
they rent a television, and at some point the television never left. After they came back, the television didn't leave. But I have no idea. I think it was still a black and white.
Yeah.
It was black and white television, and and it was only so many hours a day. Like during the day, there was no television,
No, no, nothing on. Just
nothing
what we
on.
called the test card. It was a for
Oh, yeah.
BBC. There was this iconic sort of well, it was actually in colour, but we only saw it in black and white with a little girl's face in the circle, and it just said BBC television, I think. And that was just on for hours. And sometimes you just turn it on and look at that for a long time, waiting
Yeah.
for programs to come on. Yes, I mean we were late too because my father. I don't know. My feeling is, although I was talking to my mother about this the other day, she didn't really remember whether this is true or not, but I think he didn't want a television because I think he thought he might get addicted to it. He was very worried generally about getting addicted to things. So he had, rules about, you could never have a drink in the evening before 6:30, otherwise he might become an alcoholic. But I think he felt that the television was somehow a kind of rather addictive thing. So I think mum wanted to have a TV much earlier, but we were at least 8. I was at least 8, not we, my brothers were younger. But I think I was at least 8 before we got a television. And we didn't buy one, we rented it. That was what you did, or a lot of
Yeah, maybe we rented it too because it kind of was
yes,
rented
if
and then
it
it
came and
never
went.
left. But I think I was 8 or 9,
Yeah.
certainly not before that.
Yes, and that was late compared with my friends, most of whom had televisions before that. So when I went to their houses, it was exciting to watch TV because we didn't have one. And then we did, and it was definitely black and white at that point. So if I was 8, that would be 1962-ish. And the picture was often fuzzy. There was an aerial that sat on top that was kind of like a kind of half circle with two
Like a
antenna
little
coming
space thing.
back,
Yeah,
and you had to move it round the room to get the
yeah,
clearest.
yeah, yeah.
And
Get the signal.
and it was often fuzzy. And children's television was on from like 4 o'clock till 6 o'clock, and then there was the news, and then there was adult television, and then it all closed down in the UK at about 10 o'clock, I think, and they play the national
To
anthem.
bed. Off to bed, you.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
and then also,
national
I
anthem,
think
and
in
then
summer,
the test card would come back, and
in
that was
summer, the television was closed because
yeah.
they went on holiday and it was just closed. And I remember Wednesday afternoons, there was children's television on Wednesday afternoons. We did not have a television. And there was this woman who had no children, and we kind of trooped into her living room, and she enjoyed having us there for like an hour of watching very silly, very innocent shows about, you know, yeah, being good or being funny, or it was also a time of innocence, I would say, before television. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and then there was color television, and then there were more channels, and then
Yeah.
it sort of. But there were. I mean, we because because my father was just so against television generally. It was never a family thing for us. We didn't sit around
Hmm.
as a family watching it because we lived this sort of odd kind of kind of old-fashioned life where children were very separate from the grown-ups.
Yeah.
So we used to the TV used to live in our nanny's room because it couldn't be in any of our bedrooms because then that will be unfair and anyway we might go on watching it or whatever. So we had to go into our nanny's or our au pair girl's room to watch TV, which must have been really annoying for them. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, no, we had the TV like in a corner of the living room. And then when we moved house, it sat there really as a thing in the living room, which I myself have never wanted. I've never had a TV in my living room. I don't
really.
like that. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yes. No, we certainly have that, have always had that. But yes, it was yes, and they were really heavy. If you wanted to move them, they were extremely
No, they were
heavy,
huge. They were
massive
huge.
pieces.
It wasn't a screen. It was
No, no.
held back up with I don't know. It was a huge thing. Like radios were huge.
Yes.
Became
Well, it
smaller.
had a tube in it, didn't it? I mean, what do you call them? A something tube. I can't remember that projected the light forward.
Exactly.
Cathode ray tube. That's what they're
Yeah.
called, aren't they?
Yeah. I
And
don't know
yes.
what they're called. I have no idea. I have no idea.
But yes, but the other thing, I mean, my father was actually very prescient because he used to say, I'd watch television if I could turn on what I want at the time that I wanted, if I could choose my program and watch it whenever I wanted. And we used to think, oh, God, what a ridiculous idea. That's never going to happen.
Oh, wow. Oh,
And,
wow.
that's a silly reason for not watching television. You just watch what's on and you watch what's good
Exactly.
and watch what you don't and you turn over to another program. But of course, he was absolutely right. That's what happened. And that's why that's what everybody gets now. But
But in the
interestingly,
70s, about family, in the 70s, we used to watch Peyton Place,
Peyton
which I think
Place,
was
yes,
on
with
every
Mia
week.
Farrow.
And I remember us sitting on the five of us sitting on the sofa, and my father sitting in his chair with his perennial briefcase on his knees, kind of working, and all of us crying about Peyton Place with Mia Farrow and Rodney Harrington. And then later in my student days, in this house with 23 young women, we had a tiny room. I have no idea how we all fit into it. And we would watch The Little House on the Prairie.
Oh, yeah.
And we would all cry. And oh, it was wonderful to do that together.
Yes, yes. No, the iconic programs I remember was my brother Roger got very obsessed with Doctor Who when it first came out, and I think I must have been about 10 when that happened. So I guess we had a TV by then. But that was something that, would have to be
Never
watched
seen
every
that.
week. Oh, I mean, I mean, amazingly, it's still going. It's been on and off, and there have been many, many doctors, and it's kind of an iconic British children's, but not necessarily children's TV program. And it's still interesting to watch. Sometimes it has amazingly good writing and acting. But then I mean, it was it was very cutting edge at the time. It was quite scary for children's TV. It had these things called Daleks after a time. I can't remember when they came. Have you ever come across Daleks? Well, that's okay. I'm not going to explain them to you. But they were the baddies of one kind. Doctor Who was a sort of intergalactic wizard, really. So yes, that was one. And then did you ever watch The Man from Uncle? No, no, that was a program I loved when I was about 11 or something. That was kind of
Hmm.
grown-up program. It was a sort of spy kind of thing, American. And yes, that I had to stay up
We did
special.
watch, what was it with Emma Peel?
Oh yes, the Avengers. Yes.
Oh, that was great.
Oh, that was
That was wonderful.
yes. That
Very, very British. I think maybe in the beginning, in the early days, all television in the Netherlands was Dutch. It was Dutch made because the subtitling, I don't know when that came on, but that must have been later. Yeah.
yes, yes. So do you remember when when did you first get a mobile phone yourself?
Yeah, it's difficult to remember. I remember I went to Findhorn, the Findhorn Foundation in Scotland near Inverness, the eco village and spiritual community in 98 for the first time. And I was so, so touched by their way of living, their way of being, which maybe I've said this before, but it felt like my inner life was how they lived. And so I called yours to say how I wanted to immerse myself in that way of in that approach of co-creation with the intelligence of nature, seeing work as love in action, listening to the voice of the real self and not the egoic voice. And I called him from this one phone booth that was there. So in 98 I must not have had a mobile phone, and I
No,
don't
98.
remember.
That's quite late. I think I was
It's a bit-
late 30s, 38, 39, maybe when I first got my mobile phone. But Robert had one from some time before, a few years before, and it had been a car phone. So there was this enormous
yeah,
black block, this
yeah.
brick of a thing that, you could clip into something in the car. And that was, and actually, I remember all communication was changing at that kind of time. So it must have been late 80s, early 90s when, first there were fax machines. Do you remember fax machines?
There were fax machines, but before fax machines, I bought my first computer. When I
Oh,
became a
right.
freelance writer, I bought a computer. I had just received a small inheritance, or inheritance, maybe not small. Well, was big at the time too. Anyway, I had received it from my grandmother, and I spent that on a computer that every day I had to start it with a floppy disk.
Yeah.
And it was a huge, clunky thing. And Apple was already around and was much more fashionable. You had the kind of these little space-like things. I don't remember what they were called, but were so much more expensive. I think my first computer was like 12,000 guilders at the time. So, say,
Wow. No, I don't know how much a guilder is worth actually, so I don't know why I'm saying it.
yeah, so it's like 2 guilders to the euro, and you don't
Oh,
maybe know
right.
how
No,
much a euro is
expensive.
worth.
Yeah.
No, but it was
Yeah.
hugely expensive and clunky, and the thing with the floppy. Yeah.
I think
And
Rob
then,
managed to get hold of one. That must have been in the probably yeah, about 1985 or something. And it was a very, very early thing, and it was the size of a small fridge. I mean, it sat
yeah.
in his study. It was enormous, and I'm presuming we had a keyboard and a screen, and it just, you could just type on it. That was it. I don't know how how useful it was, but yeah, that was the first one. And then I remember
Yeah.
when because we were running a TV and video production company at sort of a bit later on, 80s, 90s. And that was when we got computers in the office, and we all had to go on courses to learn how to write emails and use Word. And yes, I remember that.
I
And
use
that,
Word because you had to give in certain commands for
yeah,
it to do certain things.
yes, because before we'd all been working on typewriters.
When
So,
I worked at a bank from 81 to 84, we had typewriters. There were no computers. Then I started to work for these two men were freelancers who had their own communications business, and they had computers, and I so had to learn the computer there. So that was 85. Then I started on my own in 86, and I bought that first computer. This was there. And then when I had my company a year later, one of my assignments was with the bank, because there were 35 plus people were computer resistant. They thought, well, this won't really amount to
yes,
anything.
of
I
course.
don't need to, I don't need to learn that. So we kind of did, programs to kind of entice people to adopt this new technology.
Oh, how funny. Yes, that really
Yeah.
is kind of, yeah, going back into a very different mindset. Yes,
But it was
absolutely.
also so funny when I look back. I worked a lot like on board level and below board level. Those men, none of those men had a computer, or they had one and it was kind of stood behind, their desk unused because they had secretaries. And then they
Exactly.
expected everybody else to adopt the computer. Looking back, I think, oh, my advice might have been, why don't you start working on them? And then, you give the example, but they did not.
Yes. Well, that really changed the job of secretary, didn't it? Because secretaries were typists essentially. I
Yeah,
mean, among other things, but that was their great skill. And of course, men particularly, but never learned to type. That wasn't what they did. So they never wrote their own letters. They probably dictated. My father
dictated.
had a dictaphone. He was
Yeah,
always dictating letters to his
yeah,
secretary, that, she would then put
yeah.
headphones on and tap out on the typewriter. So yes, that changed that whole job when people, were expected to then start typing their own letters, especially when it was then it became email. It wasn't letters. It was, you had to receive your own emails,
Email.
respond.
I think email
That was the 80s, wasn't it?
was
Late
it
80s, probably.
late 80s? I can't remember anymore.
No, no. But that was,
I
I
think it was much later. I remember a friend of mine who is 20 years older, and she was on the board of trustees in Fintorn. I came on that board in 2001. And I remember her saying, so this was the early noughties. I I can't understand why you're all using email. I can't even keep track of my work without it. And we were saying, yes, but it is your work and it actually makes it easier. Now, I don't know. Well, it does make it easier, just make everything faster. But to backtrack, Lucy, so I had this communications agency, and sometimes we worked late into the night to finish an assignment. Then we would bike to the central post office to
biking,
post
yes,
it.
biking things over. That was
Biking things over. Yes, there were also couriers all the time with their helmets and biking things over. But we would, late in the evening, deliver it to the central post office, and then it would be sent to the client. And then the fax machine came.
yeah.
And then, of course, we did not have the alibi and say, oh, we took it to the post. Oh, they must have not, had it ready. And so kind of smuggled in the extra day. And then the fax machine came with this paper that was kind of a sticky paper. The
Yes.
first rows were kind of sticky paper. And I have letters from my father, which are very precious to me, but there's nothing on it anymore now.
Oh no, they faded very
Faded.
quickly.
Yeah.
Yes, well, as I said, we had a film and TV and video production company, so scripts had to go backwards and forwards all the time. And we were at one point we were doing a co-production, a TV series called Runaway Bay, which was a children's series, but it was a co-production with a French company. So we had to use French script writers for some of the episodes, and the scripts had to come backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. So the fax machine was whirring out all these, sort of pages. And well, it was just often just long reams of paper. And then you had to
Yeah.
kind of cut them up into scripts
Yeah.
and mark them up. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
you
yeah,
had
because
to
it was a role. It was
yeah,
a
and then you had to I mean the very kind of time consuming bit was feeding something into the fax so it to send it to for somebody to get it the other end. So then there'd be 30, 40 page scripts that you had marked up or rewritten or whatever, and they had to go sheet by sheet into the fax machine. Somebody had to feed it through that they would get the other
yeah.
end, and it would seem to go on forever. So that was and then of course there was emails. I don't know, when did attachments to email
Well, but
come?
email, yeah. So email only started really to work when you could do attachments. And then the fax machines,
Just
that was
yeah,
so new, that was such a revolutionary technology, was completely gone. It was old-fashioned
yeah,
at the door. No one
completely
would
useless.
fax anymore.
Yeah. And you had a separate number for your fax machine, didn't you? So
That's
you had,
true.
in your business thing, you had your business address, your phone number, and then your fax number. And then that, changed into your email address, which was different
Yeah.
again. So yeah, very different. And now it's, it's just sort of just a whole different thing again. What's the latest thing, do you think, that has sort of changed communication for us? I mean, obviously, we've got mobile phones, we've got email, we've got a million different apps to communicate on. I mean, WhatsApp is incredibly useful, I find, no matter how much I may dislike the platforms. It's for me too difficult to get out of them. Um,
It is too difficult, although I'm slowly migrating things to Signal now.
are you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is with migrating from the big ones, like, Facebook, WhatsApp, whatever, is that everybody's going to different ones. You can't, it's sort of that was where, well, still is really, and it may change. That's where most people for, either your business or particular
Yeah.
or your friends are there. And then if they're all going to go to different places, I've found, people saying, I'm leaving Facebook, WhatsApp,
Yeah.
whatever, and I'm going
Yeah.
to
But for me, for us, I mean, we're in my circle, Signal seems to be the alternative.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't had enough people say they're going to be in one place for me to think, oh yes, I can make a reasonable swap here. I
Yeah.
can,
And I mean, it's on my first screen. So then I just see a number there and then I go there. But it's
yeah.
not as easy yet as WhatsApp. But one more thing I want to remember is the answering machine.
Oh, the answering machine, yes.
Because we did not have answering machines until suddenly they came on. And then that became a much easier way to communicate because then
Yes,
the whole chasing of people, you could say, oh, we were going to meet for dinner on Thursday. Could you make it next week? And you could just leave a message on the answering machine. And
yes,
before
because
that, you
before,
just
yeah, before you
stick
just
to your
phoned people.
appointments,
Yeah, and
or you
before
would
you
never
just phoned,
find each other again.
exactly. But other one, before answering machines, you just phone people up, and if they didn't answer the phone, if they didn't pick up, that was it. You
Well,
couldn't.
that was it. You had to try again and again.
Yes, or write a postcard, or
Yeah,
I mean, you did
even
do
notes.
that as well. I mean,
Even
write
though
letters.
we wrote much more, of course,
Yeah.
much more. I think our postal service is in dire straits and it's
Oh gosh,
more and
ours
more,
certainly
more
is.
and more expensive.
Yeah.
And people complain that it's so expensive, but it is because we still expect things to be delivered, but there's much
Yeah.
less of it.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
no, we wrote endless letters and notes and postcards and invitations and Christmas cards and
Yes. Yes. If you
birthday cards and all
Exactly.
of
And if you
that.
went on holiday, the first thing you did was buy 20 postcards
Yeah.
and send them to your family and friends quickly at the beginning of the holiday so they got there before you got back.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
and
true.
and
The answering machine, I had an answering machine until my mother died. But I think at some point she got my mobile number, but she didn't really for a long time didn't really like to call me on my mobile number. She just wanted my telephone number. She knew it by
yes.
heart and then
Yes,
yeah.
and there was something sort of
Yeah.
secure and solid about a landline that felt like,
Yeah.
you knew where you were ringing into. You knew you could visualize the place, the
Yeah.
room that the phone was and where the person was standing. And I mean, I don't know about you, we don't even have a working landline anymore. I mean, we
No,
have a number and goodness knows who's ringing
no,
it, but it
no, I
doesn't.
don't have a landline anymore, but oh, these memories keep coming. Because on this mobile gadget that we had with the antenna, you could kind of program 10 numbers.
Yes.
Remember? Because before that, I knew the telephone numbers of so many of my friends. And then all of a sudden, your 10 most called numbers were in there.
Yes.
10. It was
It was just
amazing.
that, yes, the 10. And you didn't, yes, exactly. But also, before, well, even then, you had to carry around with you the whole time your address book. I mean, that was,
Yeah. Yeah.
you had to, mainly for phone numbers, so that wherever you were, you would be able to ring people yeah, I mean, and filer faxes. Do
Address
you
book in
remember?
my diary. I had this mulberry that was kind of the fashion, big
Yeah.
lead mulberry diary, and my whole life was in it. So you had to have a big bag. Nowadays, you don't need to carry so much
No,
either.
well, it's all in your phone, everything.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, do you remember filer faxes where you would, that was a real kind of innovation where it was a ring folder and you bought a new year of
Yeah.
diary every year and you had all sorts of little, I mean, it was kind of the precursor of the mobile in a way because it had sort of paper apps, if you like, your,
Yeah.
different things that you had in your filer fax
Yeah,
as
you
well
could
as just your
plan and you
diary,
had your
your address.
diary and
You could get
yeah.
maps. Who has a map anymore now? You could get fold out maps of the country of London. Um, they were all in your filofax. And if you lost your filofax, that felt like losing your life. That was it's kind of like losing your phone now, but a filofax was the kind of physical pre-electronic version of your
Yeah.
phone, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was this big mulberry kind of big. I loved it. I really
Yeah.
loved it. And at some point, I did throw it out, but with pain in the heart, with pain.
Yes. Oh, look, I've still got a filofax. That's my old filofax. I
You
have the
do.
odd kind of address in it that, that I don't remember. And what else have I got in it? Yes, I've got addresses. Oh, I've got maps.
Very useful, Lucy. I'm sure
Incredibly
you use them
useful.
all the time.
Yes, all sorts of notes and things. Oh dear.
In
Just
the Netherlands, the Shell, the oil company, had published the 100,000 Street book. And so you try to find an address whilst you were driving, whilst looking
oh,
in this 100,000 Street book. It was dangerous.
yes, oh, completely. I mean, the whole issue of map reading. I mean, couples map reading, one person driving, one person
Yeah.
map reading and giving the directions. That was probably what caused a lot of divorces, or certainly a lot of rows, the difficulty of map reading.
Oh, I do so remember that I was in the front seat for once because, my father thought I would be a good map reader, and we were kind of driving around a lake in Italy, and then it turned out I had, guided him to go the long way instead of the short way, and I can still remember his outrage. He was not amused at
Yeah.
all. It
No,
was like, and I
no.
was like, oh, I can't map read. And no, there was a lot of tension there with these huge maps, and they had to
Yes,
read.
yes, that you had to unfold and
Yeah.
unfurl.
And did
Yes.
your mother ever has she taken to the mobile phone?
Yes, yes, she uses her mobile phone. Yeah, she's pretty good with that. Yeah, she does. And yeah, she has Facebook and she has, she has her email on her mobile phone as well. Sometimes things disappear, but
Yeah.
mostly she's always been she had a computer really early on actually. And because she wrote books and she did get a computer very early to write a first book, which was about Dr. Barnardo. And I'm trying to remember when that was, but that must have been early 80s, I should think. Something. It was, yeah, she had a sort
Early.
of,
My
yeah,
mother left all of that to my father.
yeah.
My
Oh,
mother
yeah,
never had a computer. We bought her a mobile phone. It was just always, in the socket. And no,
how funny.
she
Yes. No,
left
my
that.
my parents were the other way around. My
Yeah.
father didn't do any I don't think he ever typed. I mean, I remember typing up one of his books for him. Well, it was on a computer at that point, but yeah, it was mum's no, my mother's always been a kind of early adopter of all kind of things, technology and otherwise. So yeah, but well, that's been a walk down memory lane, hasn't it?
It has. And it does spark, memories, even
Yeah.
like a felt sense of the weight of such a phone.
Yes,
Oh,
yes, and
yeah.
it sort of makes I mean it makes me think, yeah, we have lived quite a long time, haven't we? We have seen big changes from, the black Bakelite telephone sitting in the hall
Yeah.
with the cord to where we are now. But oh, it's all good fun. I think it's all interesting, and I wonder where things will go next. I suppose AI is the next big one, but let's not get into that today.
No, and I think it is, sometimes people think, oh, everything changes so fast, this kind of memory lanes shows, the change of communication and yeah. in our lifetime.
In our lifetime. Yeah, there we are. 70. That's what it covers.
70, sweet
70
70.
years.
And having been kissed
Yes. Oh, a few times.
a
Yes.
few times. Okay, my dear. See you next
Lovely
week.
to talk to you. See you next week. Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.